as Tim has kindly introduced me, I'm Jane Hunter, the CEO of Tritium, a Brisbane headquartered global company that designs and manufactures electric vehicle chargers. I'm not too sure about the running. It's got slower and slower as I've got older, but certainly I still enjoy it. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Look, it's very, very pleasing for Tritium to be presenting to an Australian audience today and to see that strong interest that we had presenting at Morgan's offices to an internal staff base a few weeks ago. With a NASDAQ list imminent for the company, we presented to over 100 US investment banks, pension funds and equity research firms, with a smattering of British organisations in the mix and one Australian private investment company. So it really is a great pleasure to be talking about the company in Australian time with Australian people, face to face and not virtually, and just to see the interest in the company. It's just fantastic. I will start with a couple of minutes on my career, which Tim said you thought you might be interested in. So where I have been very lucky to be able to have a number of really interesting global roles based here in Brisbane. Often it does take a number of years in the workforce for your various interests to converge on a specialty or a theme to emerge in your choices. I did start my career at the High Court of Australia as a senior researcher for the High Court judges. I then went to the bar and practiced for a couple of years, and that career satisfied the debating itch, and I think no doubt the 20-something's very black and white sense of justice, which quite quickly becomes grey. After a break to have children, I did return to the workforce as an in-house counsel, and it was a very short trip from there for me into business roles. And since leaving behind the practice of law 12 to 13 years ago, all of my business roles have been technology related. Over the last decade, I have become more and more focused on the very specialised commercialisation of technology, and that's an area that I've always worked in business. Whether that's been in ICT, at Boeing, in disruptive technology, and now at Tritium in what I still consider a disruptive technology. What has driven and inspired me throughout my career is taking advanced technology from those mid-TRL levels, so technology readiness levels 3 through 7, all the way through to TRL 9 and what becomes a saleable product. And then how do you monetize that product successfully to make a good quality, technically complex product which is profitable and manufacturable? And that seems to be where the rubber really hits the road here in Australia. Before I joined Tritium in 2019, I was the Chief Operating Officer for the Phantom Works division, which is showing up there. It was a small division of Boeing at that time. Phantom Works is their advanced technology arm, and they're involved in rapid prototyping and development of disruptive technology. In the US, Phantom Works projects are almost all secret. So it was a very interesting dynamic in that the domestic Phantom Works division and the international divisions had almost no overlap. They had many projects, we probably knew about one of them. Being Australian citizens, we weren't able to be read into any of those US secret programs. And in the very earliest days of that setup, what that meant was when you were on site, you had to carry a lantern, which was to identify you as a foreigner. It was a little bit like being a pariah. I'm not sure we didn't have a funny hat to go with it, but that identified you as being non-American. But what that very strange environment did was create a very wonderful freedom for us outside of the US, where the domestic division, the US division had very little interest and largely just left us free to do what we wanted to do internationally. And the start of that international business was a call from Exco in the US to say, look, you guys are free to start up an international arm of the Phantom Works business, but we won't be increasing your budget, we won't be increasing your headcount. You need to make do with what you've got, and we want you to bring in your own funding, secure your own projects, and we want you to grow that to a target that was 10 times our budget in quite a short space of time. So it was a little bit of a hospital pass, but certainly it gave us a lot of freedom. A very interesting journey in that from a core of about 20 people headquartered in Australia with staff in India, South Korea and the UK and the US, we set about building up that business into a huge global corporation. And it was very much like growing a startup from scratch with a little bit of seed funding. The only difference being if you went bankrupt, you may still have a job and it wasn't your own money on the line, but it was very much a startup. And the products that we set about to secure funding for and build, and which gradually became a portfolio of innovative technology products, were all part of a very holistic vision and strategy. We built up a portfolio of about 15 advanced technology projects that were all focused on autonomous systems, unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned underwater vehicles, the related software and mission systems you need to drive them, radar and UV detection systems, as well as the advanced sensor technology for capturing the images and data, and the software to interpret that captured data, which included data fusion technology, and then the digital twin environment that supported product design. And you can see some of those in the images up there. It's a really great Queensland story. The test beds that you see the top right are fully designed and built here by RF Design in Queensland. All of the suppliers for that drone detection system there are Queensland based, and the Loyal Wingman, of course, which is a story I'll touch on in a moment. So really it was a very exciting job to be part of. Now the culmination of that whole portfolio of products came together in the Loyal Wingman, which you can see in the image there at the top left. That's a 38-foot stealth drone co-funded by the RAF and Boeing, and it's Boeing's largest offshore R&D investment ever. So R&D funds in Boeing are very jealously guarded. It's quite hard to secure them for Australia. You fight very hard to get that money to come over here. And that project was just incredibly satisfying to lead, both from the capture and delivery side, in particular because international trade in arms regulations means you couldn't have any American citizens on that project. So that is fully designed and developed and manufactured here in Brisbane by Australian citizens, and that was mandatory. And really, if we think about what that means, it means that it's the first aircraft designed on Australian soil in over 50 years. So I think the last one may have been the Wirraway, which wasn't a very successful aircraft. And if this is successful, it really will be an amazing story for Australia, and ultimately to be manufactured here in Queensland with state government support out at Toowoomba. There's a short video here of the Wingman during recent tests in case you haven't seen it. These are all done at Woomera in top secret environment down there in South Australia.
All stations, stand by, we're ready on your call. 10 seconds. Vampire rolling in 3, 2, 1, now.
So look, it does make you very proud to see the Australian design and manufacture ingenuity for us to be building something like that right here in Australia. And ultimately what we expect with that is it will be sold to allies across the world and it's fully exportable, which is a difference for American products. So that's going to be able to be sold to countries like Japan, and we've had a number of early interests in sales in something that's co-funded by the RAF. So after UAVs for me, it was EVs. So a series of acronyms in my career. With the move to Tritium, I had called Tritium's CFO, who was formerly Defence Australia's CFO, and he said to me, look, can you come out and have a look around? I think it's just a really interesting business and we may have an opportunity for you. I actually thought he meant a business opportunity. So at the time, I was a little taken aback when I turned up and it was actually a full-scale job interview. With Mr. Toomey on the other side of the table and a series of questions. But look, it was a very fortuitous opportunity because what it actually did was make me think about leaving Boeing for the first time in 7 years, which was really a terribly interesting job, headquartered here in Queensland. But the Tritium story was actually really, really difficult to beat. And if we think about that, the most exciting aspect of the Tritium business, in my view, was that here was an Australian company which had what looked to be a world-leading technology in an industry that was right at the tipping point. This was late in 2019 when it still just wasn't clear if electric vehicles were going to be a thing or not. And David and the founders have been true believers in this for probably 20 years, David? That would be about right, wouldn't it? And, if we think about that, it's taken a long time for the rest of the world to wake up and recognise that. And when I joined in 2019, we were right on the cusp of the tipping point, and then really just after COVID, it tipped right over. Look, I was very impressed with the technology, as was everybody who's looked at it. It's the world's only fully liquid-cooled electric fast vehicle charger, which has enabled the world's only Ingress Protection 65 rating. So if you're familiar with those sorts of products in the market, an IP65 gives you a fully sealed enclosure against the elements. And that's really important in certain markets like ports, where you're on a corrosive environment, or, perhaps mines where you're sucking in dirt and dust. Now, the business had secured at that point Ionity as a customer. They're a joint venture of electric vehicle manufacturers VW, BMW, Hyundai, Daimler, Audi and Porsche, and they have rolled out the largest public fast DC charge network across Europe. So Tritium really did have the tiger by the tail, with a clear need to scale the business, to keep their market share in what was a very rapidly growing market, and to continue to invest very heavily in R&D in what remains a developing and non-commoditised technology. And you'll see up there a couple of the other key customers. Shell, so we had a press release this morning announcing that we've secured the next Shell tender. We already sell to Shell, but securing the tender for the next rollout's really important. They have some of the world's biggest rollout plans. We sell to BP, SSA Marine, who operate the Port of Oakland and the Port of Long Beach, and 4 of the 5 largest charge point operators in the world are Tritium customers. So, if we think about what the company was doing at that stage, they had 4 major shareholders in a privately listed company. 3 Australian industrial families in Varley, who are an Australian engineering company, over 100 years old, specialising in rescue and defence vehicles, and they were thinking about the electrification of their business. The St Baker Energy Innovation Fund, led by Tritium's chairman, Dr. Trevor St Baker, who's here this morning, a leader and executive in the energy sector in Australia for over 40 years, who also owns Australia's largest electric vehicle charging network and has invested in True Green Mobility, who are importing Warren Buffett-backed BYD's electric vehicles into Australia. So Trevor has a wide array of interests right across this market. Brian Flannery, the managing director of White Energy Company with a 40-year career in mining and various other business interests in development and power generation, and one major institutional investor, Gilbarco Veeder-Root, who are one of the world's largest petrol pump manufacturers. And Gilbarco had a first right of refusal to buy Tritium in a call option that matured in 2021. It was very hard to pass up the opportunity to support such a great Australian technology, which needed to keep scaling in order to maintain its market share and secure its place as one of the world's handful of top EV charger infrastructure companies. So I jumped in boots and all at that time into what was still a founder-led company, with all 3 founders still working in the business, led by David Finn, with his partners James Kennedy and Paul Cernier. And those 3 founders had been working together for 20 years since they met at UQ Engineering and joined the World Solar Racing Challenge, and that's the Sunshark up to the top left there. They came 3rd in that race, but they had built a power electronics building block that they developed for the solar racing vehicles, which was the genesis for a micro business. And you can see those products along the base there, the Wave Sculptor and the Gold Controller, and they were selling those to fellow racing enthusiasts at that time. That power electronics module, though, was hardened in the right environment, and that company DNA remains absolutely critical today, both to Tritium's vision and mission, which is focused on transportation fueled by renewable energy, but also as part of Tritium's competitive advantage in the market today. Solar racing, if you think about it, requires your power electronics to be small form factor, robust in harsh conditions, and very efficiently cooled. And those features remain at the core of the company's world-leading DC charging infrastructure. And they are actually a point of difference for us with our competitors. So a number of them are air-cooled and they come from a different industry, not from the vehicle industry and certainly not from solar racing. So 5 months after I started as CEO and Deputy CEO, I worked with the board and the founders to transition into the CEO role and allow David to fully focus all of his energies on the product development and keeping up with the market. And David and his co-founders have been unfailingly gracious in supporting me to lead their business, and that's helped enormously. What's usually a significant change management process for a company which is scaling from a startup. After about 6 months of business tidy-up, we moved into a transaction, which Tim touched on. With Gilbarco's right to buy Tritium on the horizon, the directors did want to explore that market and ensure the very best outcome for the company and its investors. And after considering potential trade sales and various other options, they also looked at listing Tritium, and the timing was just right. SPACs were just taking off in the US in a big way, particularly for clean tech companies. A SPAC, if you don't know, is a special purpose acquisition company. It's established with investor cash, and it's got the sole purpose of taking another company to market to be listed on the stock exchange. They do apparently make the list process faster and less onerous, so I can only imagine what it's like without a SPAC. It hasn't been particularly fast or less onerous. We did have a handful of SPAC offers, and we selected Decarbonisation Plus Acquisition Corp 2, which is a SPAC trading under the ticker DCRN and backed by Riverstone. And that's going to result in Tritium being listed on the NASDAQ under the DCFC, so DC Fast Charge ticker, in January. If there are minimal SPAC redemptions, we'll have cash to the balance sheet of about $274 million USD, and that's a fortress balance sheet for Tritium. We need about $68 million USD funding to achieve positive free cash flow in the company by 2023. And it should provide us not only with the cash we need to scale up sufficiently to maintain our market share, but also to potentially take the number 1 position in our key markets of Europe and North America, where we have number 2 position. So I think this is a really interesting slide. We are one of the few global companies in DC fast charging. And the exciting thing for Tritium is we remain an Australian company listed on the NASDAQ in the US, which is exactly the outcome I think we were all hoping for when we joined, and which is certainly what we need to do to support the diversification of the Australian economy, keeping ownership of our advanced technology and the intellectual property we've created, and commercialising it ourselves. So we create export businesses and make all of the value from that and reap the long-term economic benefits that those export businesses create. Too often we take that technology and we sell it overseas. So, really this is a lovely story. Tritium will become a great contributor to the Australian economy with 95% of our products exported. We have number 2 market share for the DC fast charging market in Europe and in North America, and in number 1 in Australia for Australia and New Zealand, where we have the homegrown advantage. You'll see up there in the donuts to the right, 45% of our revenue currently coming from Europe, 41% from North America, and the remainder for the Asia Pacific market. And that's quite a change for Tritium. Previously, the bulk of our revenue came from Europe, about 70%, but we've really seen the North American market come online for us with a vengeance in the last 6 months, and also a little bit of growth in the Asia Pacific market, which is good to see. We mainly sell here to Australia and New Zealand, which are small markets. If we look at the market here, about less than 2% of cars are now EVs, as opposed to 5 to 7% in a lot of other developed countries. Tritium is the only fully liquid-cooled Ingress Protection 65 rated fast charger on the market. That means all of our competitors' chargers are air-cooled. Some of them have liquid-cooled modules, but none of them are fully air-cooled. And that means they can't achieve that IP65 rating. They need a truck roll 1 to 2 times a year, and that truck roll means they have to go out and change the air filters, and that adds to a total cost of ownership, among other things, which is about 37% higher over 10 years. So we have a technology moat, and that's a key advantage for us at the moment. And you can get a little bit of a sense of the chargers there. You'll see to the left the standalone modules. They have both a DC to DC module and an AC to DC module inside the charger. And over to the right, the new model that we actually launched last week has just the DC to DC modules, and the AC to DC conversion occurs elsewhere in the rectifier unit. So in all of this, we have patents and patents pending, and we do intend to remain a technology leader. It's very important for us to lead in the technology and not follow. So you can imagine that in some markets, that is a very key competitive advantage. Not in a mild climate, but in climates like ports, electric boats, ferries, where the chargers are going to be located on the ocean front. You've got corrosive salt in that environment. In the open cut and underground mining environments where dirt and dust are going to clog up the air filters, particularly underground, it's almost impossible not to have an IP65 rated charger. And that liquid cooling also enables us to achieve one of the highest uptimes on the market. It's currently about 97 to 98%, which is market leading, and our new modular product range is now achieving over 99%. And that's really critical to all of our customers. When we speak to them about what are your top 3 criteria when you're selecting a charger, they may be safety, that's a barrier to entry, but almost always in there is uptime and reliability, because these are a developing commodity. They're power electronics. When they get hot and when you use them a lot, you will have outages. And so having market-leading uptime just does remain incredibly important. And you can see just the vast array there of where these are installed. That's a mine, a BMA coal there in the bottom left. For those of you who don't recognise it, that's the Portofino Yacht Club. We're in Monaco, we're in Venice. We're waiting for travel to open so we can go and see those charges. And then I'm not sure, maybe David Toomey will go up to Norway there, yeah. So I think the other thing, if we think about it, is that this does remain a market where we need to keep ahead of the competition with world-leading technology. The product roadmap is really exciting that David and the team are running 17 new products over the next 5 years, and that's a smattering of them. We can see there the 1 megawatt in 2023, and that will be for trucks, large buses, also for potentially ferries, and eventually for electric vertical takeoff and lift in the future. So that's a really good new product coming for us. And over to the far right there, we'll have a 25 DC kilowatt home wall unit. So for those of you who have started to drive an EV, I'd be interested to see the show of hands. How many people in the room drive an electric vehicle? Yep, just a smattering, about 5 or 6, which is probably about right. Maybe that's 2%. Hopefully it's 3. But what you'll notice very quickly is that when you plug the car in via a cord set that comes with the car, it takes 21 to 22 hours to fully charge the car. So it won't charge overnight. So you probably want a wall unit. Tesla, for example, sells a wall unit that can charge your car in 7 to 8 hours. But we do think this fast DC wall charger will be a good seller. It won't be significantly more expensive, but that will allow you to charge your car quite rapidly. And if you think of it like your mobile phone, it's exactly like that. It's not like petrol. You watch the bars ticking down and down and down, and then you start to get mildly panicked when you get down to 5%. So you do want that ability to turn up at 8 at night, be charged by midnight and go again. You just don't want to be limited, and we think that's going to be a great seller by 2023. So look, one other key competitive advantage for us is that we have built the world's highest power EMC facility right here in Brisbane. And I can't overemphasize that, coming from Boeing, where we do have EMC chambers across the globe, and certainly one here in Brisbane. There's one at Rheinmetall. This is larger and it's faster, goes up to 720 kilowatts. And what that will allow us to do is decouple from TÜV in Germany, who has a monopoly on test and cert at the moment for these very ultra-fast chargers, the 350 kilowatts. All of our competitors are in that queue. So we've invested in this facility. It can do more than just the EMC testing in the chamber. It's got thermal chambers for extreme climatic conditions, which are necessary for certification, impact testing. So, how hard can you take bangs and knocks against the charger, and all of these things that are required for certification, which is quite a high standard and a big barrier to entry. So this is the new facility that we just launched last month. So it's pretty exciting. It's quite sci-fi. I think we can have James Bond come out and use it as a set. I'm sure he can climb the walls there. But certainly a step change for engineering, and already David and the team are getting a huge amount of use out of it, and it's something that David Toomey helped drive through. So really, at this stage, we see this as an absolute game changer. So I could talk about fast charging tech for much longer, because I do find it and the technology transition from oil-fueled transport to zero-emissions transport fueled by renewable energy infinitely interesting. But we will open up the floor to questions. To wrap up, I would like to finish just to say, look, it's no accident that both Phantomworks International and Tritium are headquartered here in Brisbane. There's also top-tier engineering work going on at Rheinmetall, L3, Black Sky Aerospace, Gilmore Space Technologies and others. Brisbane does now rate in the 2021 Global Innovation Index as one of the top 100 science and technology clusters in the world, and in the top 50 globally for science and technology intensity. Our Australian tertiary education is rating in the top 10 globally, and we do rank very highly for our regulatory and business environment. So we do have this growing ecosystem of advanced technology companies and a growing startup economy here in Australia and in Brisbane in particular. So we're very perfectly placed to capitalise on these strengths and diversify our economy into an advanced technology powerhouse where we benefit from the advanced technology that was developed here rather than selling it off overseas. And Tritium's a textbook example of a homegrown startup that benefited from early state funding from the Queensland Development Fund, seed funding from local investors, support during the scale-up and losses phase from a mixture of Australian and institutional investors, and which now sits at the precipice of listing on the NASDAQ and access to the world's very best capital markets to allow the company to continue to compete on a global stage and take the very best of Australian technology to the world. There's a very exciting future ahead for this Australian innovation tech company that set out with the aim of removing pollution from our roads and powering vehicles with renewable energy. Thank you.